waiting for the Lord to tell me. And so I did get the message. So Foy and I are basically sort of trading places a little bit. Foy is still going to be on the leadership team, but I'm going to be more of the leading that particular team and facilitating these meetings at this point anyway. And let me just say one other thing before I turn it over to Danny. We were just meeting before, and I really feel like we would love to, the directional team here for this would love to take June and July off, a break from these larger Zoom meetings so that we as leaders can meet. We're going to meet in June. We're going to meet, our team will meet in June and July, and just pray about next year and the fall and topics, or, those kinds of things. And so June and July, we're gonna take off. Even though Marcus's email said we were gonna do a meeting, we're not gonna do a larger Zoom meeting. And you may get an email from Marcus or one of us at least with a survey sometime the next month. We'd love to get just input and feedback. What's working, what's not working? What are some topics you'd like us to cover? What are some things you would suggest we do for this monthly Zoom? And so there should be some communication this summer about that. And then we would like to just restart again in August, the second Thursday of August. And our Colorado, the in-person gathering is still on schedule for at Jeff's church for Longmont, Colorado. Beautiful place to visit and be in late September. Do you have the exact dates of that, Jeff? But
I do. It is September 26, 7, 8.
Okay.
That last week there in September.
So mark your calendars. There's something powerful about in person. These Zoom meetings are great, but being together as brothers and sisters in that context is really, really fun. So encourage you to mark your calendars and make it a priority to come out here. Bring your spouse too. They can hang out and do fun things around here, and it's going to be a great time. So, Foy, you are on. I just went ahead and did my thing. Do you want to say anything else?
Nope. Just wanted to affirm what Alan shared. This role for me was always a caretaker situation until someone in the Free Church on our leadership team felt called by Jesus to take the baton. So like Alan said, it's an answer to my prayer, and I'm grateful that Alan is going to be leading this group forward. So yay, Jesus, yay, Alan.
Cool. All right. Hey, Danny, why don't you go for it? I think you're going to try to share a screen here. Is that right, with some PowerPoint?
Yeah, I will in just a minute. But thank you, Alan. Thank you guys for the opportunity. And I just want to let you know that, hey, we're going to talk about building a culture of prayer, but we haven't arrived there. And so we're on that journey, just like hopefully we're all on that journey. And we've learned some stuff. And I'll kind of share the history of kind of where prayer has been at Two Rivers, because initially we didn't start off with the mindset of building a culture of prayer. It was later. It's actually much later, before God gave us that that verbiage and really part of our mission. And so hopefully we can jump in together and we can unpack together and learn from each other how we are journeying in prayer. And again, the goal is not prayer. The prayer is a critical tool to help our people grow in the relationship with Jesus. And so that's the goal. And but prayer is an important part of that. So I want to try to share the screen. We'll just kind of go through. I'm a visual guy, so and I've done this presentation at different churches, so it helps me to kind of visually walk through the history of kind of where we've been. And again, I'll try to throw in what we've learned along the way and where we are now. And then guys from Two Rivers, you all jump in at any time and you can add anything that I leave out, because this is one man's story. Okay, so all right, so here we're going to do, I'm going to try to share my screen, and hopefully you'll still be able to hear me. And
hey, Danny, I also encourage people on the chat to think of questions. We'll do a Q&A after the presentation. So just be writing down or thinking of questions that we have so that we can dialogue with the material once Danny's finished.
yeah. So can you all see anything right now? Yes, no?
Nope. We see you.
Okay, so I've hit shared screen, and I've
Let me try it.
I've
Hey, let
opened-
me try it, Danny.
Oh, wait a minute. What
Oh,
about
there we
now?
go. Yeah, you got it.
Got it?
Yep.
All right, awesome. So we'll just kind of walk through this. And I'm going to kind of go through it fairly quickly so that we can get to the part where we're just unpacking and asking questions, because I think that's how we're going to learn and grow. So, but this is our journey. It's just our journey. But later I actually found a book. That book's called Prayer Saturated Church. It's this book. And this is like a typical progression for most churches that are growing in prayer. So it's even though it was unique to us, it is kind of typical. So, and you may find yourself in any of these stages, and we'll kind of unpack together what we've learned from each stage. But just know if we were starting out, if Two Rivers was starting out and we knew from day one we were wanting to build a culture of prayer, we would have done it totally different. Okay, I'm grateful for what we've learned, and God has used that. So I'm so grateful, and I'm looking to the right because that's where you guys are on my screen. But we're grateful for what we've learned, but because of what we've learned, we would do it differently, and we would coach and encourage you to do it differently if a culture of prayer is your goal. So, hey, we're going to move on. So stage one here, it's a typical stage of when prayer starts in a church. And again, we were a church plant, so we didn't come into an existing church. But as a church plant, God always provides what we need. And early on, we just began to meet and pray. We began at Brad's house. Brad Brinson was our founding pastor, and we didn't have an office or a building, so we began to meet in the basement of Brad Brinson's house. And God stirs his people to intercession, either formally or informally. And people that hear that other people are praying, they just kind of begin to gather together. And I believe all of this is a work of the Spirit. And it's a place where we met regularly so that we could invite others to join us. And we began to grow in prayer at that time. And typically in this stage one, sometimes, and I've met with churches where there's a prayer group going and leadership doesn't even know or didn't know originally that the group was even up and going, which is not a good thing. And so, but I promise you, no matter where you are in the journey, you have people at your church that God is raising up to pray. And and typically these groups will grow by word of mouth. But as leadership, if we are aware of a group, and sometimes, intercessors can be interesting people. And I wouldn't call myself an intercessor. I love prayer, but there are intercessors that God will raise up in your churches, and sometimes they're unique, and that's okay. But as we embrace them, as we affirm the calling of God in their life to be an intercessor, it creates a safe place for them. And you'll see that God will begin to draw others with a heart of prayer because we've made it a safe place and you've actually affirmed that. And so Brad did that early on for us. And so our prayer group began to grow, even though it was very informal. But many groups, they don't grow past this point. That's kind of where they've been for years. It's just been a group of ladies or a group of older folks, or who knows, but they're kind of over here. They're actually kind of outside the circle of trust somebody might say. So, and so you can see around the table, all of the, in stage 2, you've got all the staff, the elders, everyone that's kind of leading the church. And a lot of times prayer is outside that. And that doesn't mean that prayer is not happening with these other ministries. It just means that there is intercession happening, but many times it's outside staff initially. And this was our case. We even though Brad would attend the prayer times, many times he couldn't. He was planning the church. He was a very busy guy, but prayer continued. And as awareness grew, Brad or the elders or one of the staff members, they would send us prayer requests. Hey, would you guys pray about these things? Or people that in the church that needed prayer, they would send them out to us and we would pray for them. And that was the relationship that we had actually for a number of years. And then in stage 3 in 2006, they actually invited me to come on staff, and I wasn't just pastor of prayer initially. I was actually a worship arts pastor and a prayer pastor. So, but what that did, that really showed a commitment. And this is about the same time that God was stirring our mission and giving us a mission. And part of our mission is growing a lifestyle of prayer and discipleship. And so it represents commitment to the value of prayer. And so they put me on staff, and that was great. But this is what started happening. So everybody on staff started coming to me about prayer needs. And this really helped us develop a prayer ministry. So in adult ministry, in men's and women's retreats, we would put prayer teams together for those retreats. Missions, we would put prayer teams together for missions that we would do. Student retreats, in children's ministry for the fall and summer camps that they did. So, but they were all coming to me for prayer, and I was pulling our prayer community together, and we were serving in all these areas, and that's an okay thing, but that's not the best thing. Okay. So in stage 4, this is what happened next. That and this Mark and Dave can begin to speak to this, because as Mark and Dave came on staff, we were in the midst of thinking about, well, now we're looking at other campuses and we're looking at other venues, and how can we keep growing this value? And so they really helped me by encouraging me to work with all of the other staff to grow a value of prayer and help them multiply that value of prayer in their ministries. And this has really been over the last 7 or 8 years where I've spent most of my time, is coming alongside the other pastors and directors in our ministry and helping them grow the value of prayer. But even that is not that doesn't represent a culture of prayer, but it's very it's very critical, if you want to build a culture of prayer, that all of your staff is on board. Not only are they on board, but they're practicing, and they are helping drive the value to multiply this into the hearts of the people that they serve. And so this allowed me to build relationships with our other staff members and serve them in different ways. And some of them have been easier than others because we already had tracks to run on with some of the relationships. Some of them, it's been kind of hard because we've had transition, and you start to build something and you have transition, and you have to kind of start all over again. But I'm convinced that this is really where, if you have a staff person to champion prayer, whether they're paid or unpaid, I don't think that really matters. but to really encourage them to walk alongside others on staff to drive and build that value of prayer. So stage 5 is actually setting the table for saturation or a culture of prayer. It's not a culture of prayer, but it sets the table and builds the foundation for a culture of prayer. And if you have this in place, if you have all of your leadership and all the ministry areas champion the value and producing the value within their ministries, then you're setting a good foundation to build a culture of prayer and to reproduce it, which is the harder thing. How do we continue to reproduce that value as people come and go and new people come in? How ongoing or how do we continue to build in an ongoing way that value of prayer, and so that the congregation can grow? And I would say that this is we are here now. We're not all the way down the road here, but we are probably for the first time in a long time in a position and a posture to really begin to build and cultivate a culture of prayer, because we're all on board, we're all practicing, and we're teaching to the value, we're casting vision for the value. And again, prayer is not the goal, but it's a tool to help you get to the goal. And so prayer is not our vision, but we can't accomplish our vision without prayer. And not just staff praying, but our whole congregation praying together and growing in a lifestyle of prayer, which is the goal. Questions about anything that I've shared so far? Is that clear? Because I kind of run through it really quick, but does that make sense? Yes.
I got a question, Danny.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from stage 1 to stage 2, I may have missed this, but are you saying that in stage 2, you formed a single prayer group? Like there were all these groups praying in stage 1, kind of out there and being aware of that, but you consolidated that into a one meeting or gathering? Or did I?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I probably wasn't really clear. No, it was always one. Well, I don't want to say that it was just one prayer meeting, but typically we would meet weekly, and people that were connecting with prayer at that time were all meeting together. And again, this wasn't a large group early on. This is 5 to 8 people typically every week coming together to pray. But as word spread that we were praying, and probably after the first few months, we moved it from Brad's house to actually a lobby of a doctor's office that we used after hours. It grew more, but it never grew into, huge numbers. It was always small for the first several years. Even when we moved into the prayer trailer, we never had more than 15 or 20 people gathering together to pray at one time. Does that make sense? Now, there were seasons in there that we would call the whole church to pray, and we might have an evening of prayer, or we'd pull a 12-hour time of prayer together, and we'd have more people come to that. But typically, initially anyway, it was a small group of people that were coming together to pray.
So when did the well, when did the well concept where you actually pulled together a specific weekly kind of meeting for worship and prayer in this process, and how important was that in this process? And maybe explain what the well is, because maybe some guys don't know what that is.
So the well is our weekly prayer and worship gathering. We call it prayer, worship, and community, which are all strategic and part of our mission. And so the well actually came out of these meetings that went from Brad's house to the doctor's office to when we had land, when we bought land, we put a prayer trailer out on the land. It was actually a prayer / construction trailer on the land. And we would meet there on Monday nights to pray. And again, it wasn't large numbers, but two things began to happen when we began to pray on the land, which the Lord really directed us to do. It's the reason we put the prayer trailer out there. First of all, people started coming from outside Two Rivers to come and pray with us. I mean, people would drive up and they would just hear that we were praying, or they would get word that there was a group of people praying on the land. And I believe these were mostly intercessors from the city that would come and just jump in with us. And I built some of those relationships, and some of those, actually one of those guys is still at our church, has been there for years, but others still attend other churches. But it was just a time where we were really interceding for the way that God was wanting us to grow. And that was the same season that he was teaching us how to pray listening. And so we were trying to pray whatever he put on our hearts, and that was good. But the other thing that started happening was people that needed prayer for physical healing would start coming. And Brad, even from the pulpit, would say, hey, if you need prayer, there's a group of folks out praying on Monday nights. You can go out and they'll pray for you. So we started having lots of folks come for prayer, and we weren't sure if they were coming to pray or to be prayed for. So we just pull everybody in for a prayer time initially, and then towards the end, we would pray for anybody that needed prayer. And again, we're using worship music first from a cassette, then from a CD in the midst of our prayer. So we're worshiping, we're listening, we're going from prayer to worship, back into prayer, back into worship, using a CD or an iPod at some point. But so it wasn't until we actually built our building. Well, and actually even before that, it got to be, we had so many people coming for prayer that we split into 2 nights. So the intercessors continued to come and pray for the needs of the church on Monday nights. And then on Wednesday nights, one of our elders and a guy named Tom Ashwood would actually meet, and we would pray for people that were coming to be prayed for healing. And both of those were going on simultaneously for probably the next 3 or 4 years until we got into our building. And when we got into our building, God said, okay, now it's time to put those groups back together. And that became what now is the Well, where we are, again, we're worshiping, we're asking the Lord to lead us in prayer, whatever's on his heart for that night. We're trying to listen and pray the way for what he wants to do. And we also still have listening prayer teams, which can pray for healing as well. So now we just kind of put it all together, and it's kind of a place where you can go and pray, or you can go and be prayed for, you can go and just worship or journal or whatever. That's that space. But the cool thing about that space, it's a place every week that you can invite people to. And it's a place that we can train people at the same time. Long answer to your question.
No, that was really helpful. Are there other questions you guys have of what Danny's been sharing?
Hey, Danny, you said you put a really high priority on making sure the whole staff was on board with that. How did you do that?
You just have to do it relationally. And so, and also it wasn't just me, and really, I have to say this, because early on, Brad really blessed the things that God put in my heart about prayer and things like quiet waters in the well. But it wasn't until Mark and Dave came and we began to have a team approach to our teaching. And again, we're creating, God really used Mark to create a leadership structure for multi-campuses. It wasn't till then where we could really sit down and they would invite me in for a collaborative effort on, okay, this is not just on you. This is on all of us. It can't just be one champion of prayer. If all of us aren't championing prayer, none of us are. And I can't tell you what peace that brought to my heart when I heard Mark say that. And so they are now, we've been teaching this from the pulpit. We've been teaching this to our staff. So every Monday morning staff meeting, we pray together. I mean, it's a big part of what we do for each
How long
other.
do those sessions usually go? I mean, because we have staff meeting and we usually pray popcorn prayer for about 5 minutes, maybe 10, and then we jump into the meeting. Do you intentionally like carve out extra time for that?
Yes, because I would say that most of this past Monday, we spent the majority of the time praying, and it kind of ebbs and flows depending on what needs to be shared that day. But there's always prayer time. It's a high value, not just praying for each other, but praying for each other, but also praying the way for what God is doing in the midst of our ministry for that week. And the thing that's been so good about this, and I highly, highly recommend this if you're not doing it, as you're creating your sermon plans and your sermon series, pull everybody together and let them pray into that with you, and ideas are generating so that in their areas of ministry, we're running out the same things. And so, we're not surprised by anything. I'm not surprised by anything anymore because we're all pulling the rope the same way. And for somebody that's been here about 24 years now, it's great when we're all pulling on the rope the same direction. So.
I was wondering if Mark could also answer that. I'd love to hear kind of from a senior leader's perspective, Mark, what that transition was like, or what it's been like for you to encourage the staff to engage in prayer. Is he frozen?
Not frozen, but he's muted. You're muted. You're muted. You're still muted. Oh, there you go. Nope.
Bringing the IT team here.
I don't know. I got all the tech I can handle right now.
Whoever is hosting the meeting should be able to click on him and unmute him from their end. So, do you know who's running the meeting today?
How do I don't know if I click on his picture, or
Yeah, there should be an option to.
because it just gives me chat or pin. Let me get out of this screen here. The share screen. Can we get out of that? Maybe that would.
You want me to not share and then come back?
Do you have more? Oh yeah, you do have some more here. Why don't we
Hey,
There you go.
there it
hey,
is.
it takes a village. Now that I feel like the complete town idiot, I don't even know how to work a computer. The direct question is what about the transition?
I was just curious. The question was how
Okay.
Danny got the staff on board with
Come
prayer,
on,
and
I feel so stupid.
are we good? Can you hear that?
I can hear you now. Would you
Okay.
repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, no, Danny was answering the question from Matt about how he got the staff kind of on board with prayer and making that a priority. And I was just curious how you would answer that question just from a senior leader perspective.
Well, actually, when it first started, I wasn't the senior leader. I was a senior leader. I was an executive pastor. And part of the role for that is make sure the culture of the church is being not only executed, but experienced among core staff. And so we just did it in staff meetings, like Danny said, relationally, from staff meetings to personal relationships with people on our staff, and practicing the very things we were doing publicly, from meetings to one-on-one to one-on-five, to actually just practicing who we long to be as a church. And so I think that was pretty critical. I felt like as a senior leader, and having a lead team, and the structure sort of changed and shifted over the last probably 10 years, little by little. I feel like more and more of us share that same value. Danny has a love for prayer. We definitely are word and spirit people from the get-go. And yet Danny doesn't have a corner on that. And when Danny said he felt relieved about that, we were also relieved that Danny didn't feel like he had to be the champion of that. Danny doesn't represent all of that. If that's not who we are, then let's not make that part of our culture. Let's not make that part of our mission or our vision to be a people who are word and spirit. And so it was really just driving it down in informal ways, but also formal ways. I would say the last few years, we used to probably operate before, maybe 3 years ago. Hey, this is the stuff that once you become a part of the church, you'll kind of experience and figure out later. Like when you get further down the hall and into some maybe back rooms or back into the kitchen. And I think with our new structure and our leadership team, and under Dave Gruhn's leadership in the teaching pastor role, we just talk about it on weekends like it's a normal thing. Like we just expect people to hear from God. We create and carve space in our weekend experience, no matter who's speaking or leading worship, whatever, that it's fair to ask God. In fact, it's expected. You should ask God a question and expect He'd want to answer. And so I think we've just dripped it. I think that's Larry Osborne's deal. Drip, 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 drip. We've just drip, drip, drip this into our culture throughout all of our gatherings, whether they be corporate or even in our staff and maybe more individual meetings. I don't know if Dave's on there, if he wants to respond as well.
That's great. That's really helpful.
I think the other thing that Danny and I spent a lot of time talking about along the way was trying to build on-ramps for like it can't just be one thing. It's not like it can just be like, how do you take a multi-layer approach to prayer? And I think now we're just really starting to build towards that, where you have not just a midweek prayer opportunity, but where does prayer fit in at every level of what we're doing? So I think on-ramps, easy on-ramps for people to engage in prayer ministry has been also it's been an important next step for us.
Perfect introduction to the next slide.
Yeah, keep going, Danny. Go for it.
Yeah, so building any culture is like cultivating a garden. And I was thinking about this week. It reminded me of my dad. My dad's been gone for about 30 some years now, but garden was his passion. That's when he got home from work, he loved to garden, and he bought 3 acres behind our house so that he could have a big garden. And he was always working in this garden. And if the root word of cultivate and culture is actually to tend to and to grow. And that's really what building a culture is. It's an ongoing work. And so here's what I believe is true. And Mark and Dave, you guys can jump in and add anything, but I believe you have to cast vision. If you want to build a culture of prayer, you have to talk about it, and you have to talk about the why. Why do we want to build a culture of prayer? Well, it's not for prayer. It's so that we can be empowered to walk out the fullness of what God's called us to be individually and corporately together. And I believe that leadership has to be all in. And several years ago, we took our well team up to the Tabernacle, Brooklyn Tabernacle, met Jim Cimbala and his team up there. And I wanted to invite Jim down to lead one of our listen ups, Alan, that you've come and led before. And we met him. We only got to talk to him for about 15 minutes, but I was talking to him and telling him a little bit about our church and our passion to build this culture of prayer. And he said, it's great. He said, I'm so excited. He said, and I'm glad that they've actually invested in your pastor of prayer, but where's Brad? And it's like, it was the highest commitment for Brooklyn Tabernacle, who has over 3,000 people come to a Tuesday night prayer meeting. And this prayer meeting's phenomenal. People start lining up for it an hour before it starts. The staff of that church is across the front of the room, and they open it up for prayer. So the staff is actually praying for people an hour before the meeting even starts. And then the prayer meeting starts, which they're praying for their community. They're praying for the needs of the church and the needs of the people in the church. But Jim Simblin told me this. He said, staff may miss a Sunday morning. We may travel. We may miss a Sunday morning, but staff, we will never miss a Tuesday night unless it's just a dire emergency, because it's the engine of our church. And, I have never forgot that. I think I came home. I think I told Mark and Dave that. And so we are all in as leadership. And I've never been more supported in prayer and the ideas that we have together and think about and unpack together. I've never been more supported in prayer than I am right now. And that's so critical. So whoever that champion is in your church, whether they're paid or unpaid, get to know them, encourage them, affirm them, and work with them, coach them, but support them. And then you got to teach to the value, which we have been doing. Our guys have been knocking it out of the park. And in every sermon for the last couple of years, or maybe even longer than that, ever since we've had our teaching team, we have next steps at the end of the sermon. And one of those next steps is always about prayer, listening to him, praying, asking him. Prayer is a two-way conversation, but every week the congregation is getting that's a value. So it's repetitive, but it's just with rhythm. We're just kind of hammering home that this is the direction that we're going in. We want to become a culture that automatically does that. And then you have to model that, right? And so we are modeling that on Sunday mornings and the weekends, but we're modeling it with our staff as well. And then we can create environments like Quiet Waters in the Well, and actually women's, through all the different ministries, there's an expression of it that's growing. We haven't arrived, but we're growing in all those areas. And so we have to keep creating those opportunities to practice the value. I believe we have to do that with rhythm, with a consistent rhythm, so that people can know that it's coming. They can invite people to it, and it helps them grow. And Dave's word was right on. And actually, Dave's the one that first came up with this word. I remember years ago when he was missions pastor that we talked about building on-ramps, and the idea about that. I don't know if you've ever been in a different city than you live in, and you see the interstate, you're trying to get to that interstate, but you can't find an on-ramp. And a lot of times with our people in prayer and other areas of ministry, they want to get there. They see everybody on the interstate. They're trying to get there, but we haven't done a good job of building on-ramps for them to engage at whatever stage or whatever part of the journey they're on. So we've done a really good job, and we're continuing to do things to build on-ramps all throughout the year that it allow people to engage in prayer, maybe sometimes for the very first time. But through our small groups and our weekend experiences and different things that we put together, we'll talk about some on-ramps if you want to, but we have to do those things. And then you have to repeat. I remember when my dad was working in this garden, we sowed seed, we watched it come up, we water, we would have to weed it, we would have to prune it, then we would harvest it, then we would start all over again. We'd get the soil ready, we would plant seeds, we just start all over again. And that's what you have to do to build a culture. I think you just have to continue to repeat the things that are working. And again, our goal is not that we would all be praying. We want to build a lifestyle prayer so that our people can grow in all that God has for them, what he created them for, the purpose, the plan that he has for their life. Apart from prayer, it's not going to happen. And prayer is a crucial part. I mean, it may be the most critical part of any discipleship model. And sometimes we that's understood, but it's really not said. And that's why we have to tell the why. Why are we building a culture of prayer? It's so that we can grow and individually and corporately into the purpose and plan that God created us for. Apart from it, I don't think we can ever be empowered by the Spirit to walk out the fullness of the mission and the vision that God's given us. Questions about any of that? That was a mouthful. Okay, here are some resources. So these are great resources. Some of these we've actually used as on-ramps, and some of these are older that you probably recognize. Jim Cymbala's Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, awesome book on corporate prayer. Daniel Henderson, if you don't know Daniel Henderson, his ministry, Strategic Renewal, I think is the name of it. He travels and he's out of Colorado. He lives in Colorado, Denver. I believe it's Denver. He travels to churches and helps them with word-based, worship-based prayer. And he's a great resource. We had him in for a Listen Up conference. That resource, Prayer Saturated Church, all the stages that we just walked through, even though we lived them, I didn't know it was a thing. Well, it is a thing. And so Cheryl Sachs wrote that book years ago, and it's a great resource as you're building out the foundation and leadership. And we didn't talk today about building a prayer ministry, and I'm grateful that I think we built a great prayer ministry, but we built it the hard way. I promise you this: if you'll build a culture of prayer, you can build a first-class prayer ministry out of that. It'll be a whole lot easier than the way that we did it. I promise you. The New York City Noon Prayer Meeting by Talbot Chambers, awesome book. And then this 21 Days of Breakthrough Prayer from Daniel Henderson. We actually took our whole church through that. It's just an on-ramp. It's a way to get everybody praying the same direction over a period of time, and you can work it in with a sermon series. Dave Gruen also introduced me to this resource a couple of years ago in COVID, and we use this at least a couple of 3 times a year. It's 247prayer.com. It's an online resource that is a scheduling app that you can have set aside times of prayer for your whole congregation. They can go online and sign up. You can put your themes and prayer points and everything on it. It's just a great tool to gather everybody around a certain topic or theme for prayer. So those are just some of the resources. Dave, Mark, you guys may have others, and you all may have other ones that we want to hear about as well. And then I had some, I didn't know if we would get to breakout rooms or not, Alan.
No, we're probably not. I'd love to just keep it as a group here. Are there any other questions that you have of anything Danny shared, of them or the Two Rivers staff here? Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, Danny,
Yeah.
you mentioned up front the things that you would have done differently. Are there a couple things specifically come to mind, or what are you thinking about?
Yeah. So what we would have done differently, again, it was probably in 2007. I don't know who has the background noise, but if you can mute, that would be awesome. Oh, that's great. You know, early on when the prayer groups were forming and we had the prayer trailer, we didn't have yet, we kind of knew a vision and a larger scope of things God was calling us to, but we really didn't have our mission statement then. We really worked on our mission statement and got it beginning in 2007 is where we really formalized our mission statement. And our mission statement is welcoming people into a caring community that honors the word and spirit of Christ, so that our lifestyle of prayer, worship, discipleship, and service is multiplied locally and globally. I still have to have it pinned up here because I can't memorize that. But it talked about, we wanted a lifestyle of prayer, worship and discipleship and service. And so early on, I wasn't thinking about a lifestyle. I was thinking about, let's just gather people to pray. And then out of that, we began to create listening prayer teams and healing prayer teams and freedom prayer and all that. But all that just began to happen out of need. It really wasn't a plan of mine. And so if I was going to do it over again, I would start with the premise that, hey, we can all hear God's voice, and prayer is two-way communication, and we're all called to it, and we should all be growing and practicing it, not just a group of people over here. And if we do that, you'll always find the people that God's raising up with a passion for prayer, and that can be a core for a prayer ministry. But that's what Mike, that's how I would shift it and call people to the vision early on. We just didn't do that because we just didn't know to do it. And Mark, Dave, you may want to jump in on that. Or maybe not.
Yeah, I think it's I already said it. I mean, in many ways, it's how do you just think through it holistically, and thinking about what are the ways that we can incorporate it, that it's just not always the same as well. Like it's just the same. And sometimes, we fall into that rut and trying to reinvent things and give people new opportunities so they can hear it differently. And just giving everybody opportunities, probably for me, the biggest thing.
Yeah. And I would say this too, sometimes God is he's just so kind, because for the first 12 years of the church, at least 12 years, every elder that we have came through the prayer training. So this value of prayer was embedded to them long before they became leaders in the church. But without exception, for the first 12 years of our church, and all of our elders now are totally practicing a lifestyle of prayer. They're sold out to prayer. Our elders have set aside a meeting every month just for prayer, so that it doesn't compete or they don't have to squeeze time out of their meetings. So God's really gracious and kind in that, because that was such a gift. And so if I have a discussion with an elder and I'm talking about the value of prayer or building a culture of prayer, they totally get it. They're on board with it. They're cheering us on, but they're also rolling up their sleeves and jumping in to help us. And so, in fact, our elder chair, Bruce Wagner, is on our well team, and he's involved in prayer. In fact, after this call this afternoon, we're going to be praying some healing prayer for a guy that's coming. So that's been a gift of God to our church, and we're just so grateful for that.
We got just a couple more minutes. Maybe I'd love to hear you and anyone else on your team, but I struggle sometimes with this idea of mandating staff going to prayer things and actually wanting it to be their choice. And so like we have a staff prayer time, really want people to come, but we have like 5 people to show up. It's not mandated. And so I wonder if you guys have wrestled with that at all, or like a worship and prayer night where you really want all your staff there, but they're not. But then when you mandate it, it feels like suddenly it's a requirement when you want it to be their heart decision. So how do you guys, just quickly, we only have a minute or two on that. How do you, any initial thoughts on?
Mark, you want to unmute? You want to?
Yeah, I think I agree. I don't think I would ever require staff members to attend. It's like at that point, and I get every culture is a little different, but I think at that point, I think it becomes something that it becomes a box you're checking rather than a life you're living. And and I don't think, to be honest with you, that attending Wednesday night well means that you're all in on prayer. I think we're past that. I think we have a lot of spaces and opportunities throughout our entire ministry where we expect and provide and create spaces for folks to engage prayerfully in relationships and community and small groups. And so, yeah, I think I'd have a hard time mandating that personally.
Yeah, and yet, I mean, we're thinking new into this next year too, right? And so on a weekly basis, we have the well, but this next year we're going to have 3 church-wide nights, and where we've called everybody that this isn't, whether it's kids ministry, student ministries, hey, we're going to pray together, and we'll make it an encouraging, upbeat kind of time. It won't be an hour of drudgery for them, but our student ministries didn't really have like an option to opt out. Like, hey, we're going to opt out on this. But it's not like every week you can do that. How do you pick the certain times to say this is something we're going to do together, to be strategic in that? And so that's one of the things in this next year that we're 3 times a year, we'll say, hey, this is, Wednesday night, we're all praying together. Kids, students, moms and dads, all of us praying together.
Just like we do with any other big event, whether it's Quiet Waters or whatever. I mean, staff are required. Those are expectations. That's all staff on board.
Yeah, you're clear about that. And it comes from the team rather than just one person. The team is saying, hey, this is a value. So that's great. Danny, thank you so much. Hey, could you unshare that so that I could see everyone?
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, Danny, for that, and for Two Rivers. This has been awesome, really, really helpful. Let me just remind you guys, I apologize, I'm at Chick-fil-A and it started to get more and more crowded. So I'm sorry. Whenever I would hit unmute, you heard all the kids around me. But this is a holy place, right? Chick-fil-A. So just a reminder, we're going to take a break from these larger meetings, June and July. We'll restart them in August. And again, if you hear communication from us, an email wanting feedback, if you could take like 5 minutes and just give us feedback, that's kind of what we're looking for from this group. We believe just the team's ideas are better than any one individual. And so that would be extremely helpful. Anything else anyone has before I ask Danny just to pray for us and each one of our churches and in the area of prayer?
Danny, thank you. That was very helpful. I just so happen to be starting a sermon series on called Let's Pray. So I'm excited. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Amen. Yeah, Danny, could you pray for us?
Yeah, sure can. Father, thank you so much for your goodness and your love. And Father, thank you for this group, everybody that's here and other people that work here today. Father, I know that this is on your heart, that you're in this season. I believe that you're spurring on prayer in our hearts because it is what keeps us in your presence. It's what keeps us with our eyes and our ears towards you, so that you can give us the strategies for this season that we're in, so that the church can be the church. And Father, as we grow in prayer, it changes us. It draws us closer and deeper in relationship with you, where you can hear our voice and we can get God's strategies for the things that you've called us to personally and corporately. And so, Father, I just pray that you continue to work for all these guys. Would you continue to lead us, that we have our eyes on you, and that you would lead us in all of our endeavors, and that they would be your endeavors, not just ours. We don't want to come up with a plan and ask you to bless it. Father, we just want your plan, your strategy. Would you do that for each of us? We're so grateful for you. We thank you. Thank you so much for this time. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Danny. Good job. See you guys later. We'll be in touch.
God bless.